Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Frerichs, you said that ESG is data. And some people call it ESG, some people call it responsible investing, some people just call it exercise of fiduciary obligations. But in any event, you're saying what's under attack is data. How could more data hurt?
More data cannot hurt. More data is what we need as investors to make good decisions. I liken this to these attacks of states that would prescribe asset managers or proxy advisors providing this data for us is to making us pick a fantasy football team without knowing the players' weights, their injury status, their track record. You can't make good decisions without useful, pertinent information. And that's what ESG is.
Go into a time machine for a second, if you could. How does your job differ from someone who was the treasurer of Illinois 50 years ago? I mean, back in those days, it seemed like it'd be simple if you were trying to do the valuation for an auto company. How many autos are pumped out every year and number of man hours that go into and so on. How is the valuation of companies different today in 2023 than it was 50 years ago?
The nature of value in the S&P 500 has changed dramatically over the last 50 years. If you look back in the early 1970s, it was probably somewhere between 75 to 80% of the total value of the S&P 500 was intangible assets. Things like cars, things like paper, things like pencils. And you could do an analysis, financial analysis, how many acres of forest you have under contract, and you could see how many cars and pencils you could produce, and you could reach a value. Today, the S&P 500 has about 80% of the value in things like brands, intellectual property. And those things are subject to different risks than those companies 50 years ago. We are just trying to guard against those risks. A company like Google is not worth how much it is today because the number of petaflops of data they have. It's based on their reputation. Apple is not worth $1 trillion because of the number of iPhones they sell, but because of their reputation. And those are susceptible to social and governance risks.
Well, you know, some of the disagreement here is about facts, and I appreciate what Attorney General Reyes just said. He made the claim that the ESG informed investments do more poorly than the Standard & Poor's General. Our data is completely different from that, showing that it's been overperforming. I'd like your comments on that, but then I'd like you to comment on this. Let's say Utah sees it differently than Illinois. Is there any problem with you pursuing the investment strategy you want and Utah pursuing the investment strategy they want?
Investing is not easy. Some people want to put more work into it than others. If someone doesn't want to look at this data, that's fine. They have that freedom. Nothing in ESG prescribes that someone has to consider these sources. I would say they would be not fulfilling their fiduciary duty if they didn't, but they had that right to. And I would cite other studies like a New York study, Stern School of Business, a recent meta-study, which is a statistical analysis that combines the results of multiple academic studies. Looked at 245 individual studies on ESG and financial performance. The study found a positive relationship between ESG and financial performance for 58% of those studies. Only 8% showed a negative relationship. You can pick and choose. Any investment strategy will have quarters where it performs better than others. You can pick and choose, but over time, ESG has been a good set of data to help us make better investment decisions.
And you make that judgment as a financial expert who has a fiduciary duty to everybody in Illinois, right?
I have a fiduciary duty to the beneficiaries of those pension funds, the beneficiaries of those college savings funds. I don't have a fiduciary duty to the oil and gas industry.
But you've got a fiduciary duty to maximize the returns, and what you're saying is you want more information. Like somebody says, this Purdue company just got 57% in the last quarter. Invest in Purdue. What about saying, well, that's all that you could do at that point? You can't look at whether or not they're trying to get people addicted to drugs because that would be too woke.
That was exactly what happened with Purdue Pharma. If you looked at their financial returns, they showed themselves to be a very profitable company. But we wanted to know more because there are risks associated with selling highly addictive drugs.
Oh, so that's a real case for you.
Real case. Yeah. Reputational risks, regulatory risks, litigation risk. And those litigation risks took a company that was very profitable for a long time and bankrupted it.
Okay, this is my final question. Why shouldn't Congress say, well, you know what? or the House of Representatives, the anti-ESG people, we're in control. We're going to stop states like Illinois from looking at all the data. What's wrong with that?
Well, that is what some states are doing, and it is costing those states not insignificant amounts of money. You pointed out some of those. The state of Indiana, their pension system said it's going to cost an additional $6.7 billion to comply with their anti-ESG law. The state of Kansas, it's about $3.6 billion. The state of Kentucky, the Kentucky pension system, said if forced to comply with their state's anti-ESG law, they would not be following their fiduciary.
They would rather be broke than woke. I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes